The point of what we've just watched is firstly to honour those of our colleagues beyond Australia who have suffered, in far too many cases, died, trying to uphold a principle of their craft to expose the secrets that the abusers of power do not want the public to know. But the second purpose of that package is to provoke an honest appraisal of how that same fundamental principle is working in our own country on our own domestic beats. First things first, it would be remiss of me not to refer specifically to the appalling and outrageous casualty list of Palestinian journalists and other media workers in Israel's war on Gaza. Since the brutal attacks by Hamas on Israeli citizens 2 years ago. Having excluded independent global media access inside Gaza, leaving us all to rely on local journalists substantially to bear witness to the devastating effect of Israel's bombardment on the civilian population of Gaza and the famine that has accompanied it. Israel has failed dismally to explain with any credibility why so many journalists have been killed. Importantly, what we should acknowledge tonight is the impact those journalists have had in return for their sacrifice. They've confronted the world with powerful evidence that has gradually taken on the look and feel of genocide in real time in our living rooms, as well as the corridors of the UN and its agencies. It is significantly due to the courage and stubborn determination of those journalists that no reasonable citizen of the world has been able to look away. They and their surviving colleagues have provided an irresistible clarity of truth that has profoundly influenced global public opinion to the point where even some close allies have been compelled to condemn the nature of Israel's ongoing war and declare their recognition of a state of Palestine. On press freedom, generally, in a world that is becoming more and more illiberal, including now the most powerful democracy of all, the message is becoming stark for our own country. When the President of the United States sits in the White House with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, as he did a week ago, and seeks to dismiss the brutal murder and probably dismemberment of Saudi journalist and Washington Post writer Jamal Khashoggi by agents of the Saudi government as things happen, and castigates the journalist who dares to ask the Crown Prince about it, it illuminates just how far the ground has shifted for journalism in the United States. All those massive lawsuits against mainstream media outlets Donald Trump regards as the enemy that are designed to intimidate against continuing to chronicle his alarming demolition job on the institutions that underpin democracy in America are testament to the clear and present danger for a strong, free, effective and independent media everywhere. And don't kid yourself, it can't happen here. America was softened up for Trump long before he arrived, and there is a lesson in that. Even the constitutional protection of a Bill of Rights and the First Amendment protection for press freedom has been diminished in Trump's America, and we have no such constitutional protection here anyway. On this night, 6 years ago, as chair of the Walkley Foundation, I highlighted a rare unity of purpose within our industry called the Right to Know Coalition, to pressure the Morrison government to strengthen press freedom in Australia after separate federal police raids on the ABC's Sydney headquarters and journalist Annika Smethurst's home in Canberra. Raids that were widely seen as a clumsy attempt at intimidation after embarrassing leaks of secret government documents. 9 days later, December 7, 2019, Anthony Albanese, as opposition leader, attacked the Morrison government for its failure to support press freedom, in which he referred to the raids as reflecting, quote, something sinister. There have been 2 parliamentary inquiries into press freedom since then, with some 30 recommendations for reform, and Mr Albanese has now been Prime Minister for 3.5 years. But still, raids like those on both the ABC and Smethurst could happen again, with a not terribly robust hurdle to jump. Federal police would have to follow some basic guidelines applying to, quote, sensitive cases, If a case proceeded to prosecution, depending on the nature of the offence, it might need to be signed off by the Attorney-General. Not nearly enough. If the government is really serious about this, it would include judicially contestable warrants before such raids could take place. In his 2019 speech, Mr Albanese declared, quote, "Journalism is not a crime. It's essential to preserving our democracy." One test of his resolve would be to deliver uniform national shield laws to allow journalists to protect their sources without the threat of imprisonment. But today, although there are shield laws of one sort or another in place in every state as well as nationally, the overall framework has been likened to Swiss cheese. And despite ongoing appeals, there is no obvious sign of a process to harmonise shield laws. In 2019, Mr Albanese said, quote, "We don't need a culture of secrecy. We need a culture of disclosure." Well, in 2023, his government's own formal review put the number of secrecy provisions in Commonwealth law at 875. 2 years later, there are more. Not fewer. More, not fewer, secrecy offences. Not that many more, but it's going in the wrong direction. Not a good sign. Quote, "Protect whistleblowers," Mr Albanese said in 2019. "Expand their protections and the public interest test," unquote. We're waiting on the government's revised whistleblower reforms to be tabled in Parliament, and if it's still wedded to the establishment of a whistleblower ombudsman, rather than a strong, independent whistleblower protection authority casting a wider net, then we should be seriously disappointed that the government has fallen short of the expectation that Mr Albanese raised 6 years ago. Those of you who were here last year saw and heard from two whistleblowers, David McBride and Richard Boyle, whose lives were upended because they were courageous enough to blow the whistle, in one case on war crimes in Afghanistan and the other on indefensible debt collections on behalf of the Tax Office. One big test of this government's credibility will be whether a McBride or a Boyle would still face jail in the future under the new laws. Right now, that is still possible. If these things are not in the public interest, what on earth is? Quote, "Reform freedom of information laws so they can't be flouted by government." Mr Albanese said that in 2019. But we're now told that his proposed new freedom of information laws will have the opposite effect. Rick Morton, for one, a journalist with 2 Walkleys for his work bringing public clarity to the awful truths of robo-debt, and who knows the public scandal from the Morrison years inside out, observed in the Saturday paper recently, the Albanese government's proposed amendments to the Freedom of Information Act ask us to take seriously its proposition that robo-debt may have been avoided under a regime with more secrecy. So on reflection, the government's scorecard against the benchmarks Anthony Albanese set in 2019 as opposition leader is mixed. He certainly talked the talk, and to a degree he's walked the walk. But given what's at stake now, and in a potentially very volatile climate ahead, and I haven't even mentioned where AI is going to take us, even 5 years from now, we as an industry cannot afford to lose sight of important unfinished business. And in that regard, where is the Right to Know coalition now? The one that united our industry 6 years ago. Our broad challenges are growing, not lessening. We need that united front, and we need it to be visible to the national community of this country. In September, the remarkable Filipino-American journalist Maria Ressa addressed our National Press Club. Her shared Nobel Peace Prize in 2021, in her case, for safeguarding freedom of expression in the Philippines, particularly during the authoritarian reign of Rodrigo Duterte, brings compelling authority to the warning note she sounded directly to Australia. With one foot in each of her home countries, she's well placed to do so. One of the keys to Duterte's political success while it lasted, like the political movement that supported Donald Trump into office in both his first and second terms, was his use of social media to control the narrative. Ressa contends that, quote, "The greatest threat we face today isn't any individual leader or one government. It's the technology that's amplifying authoritarian tactics worldwide, enabled by democratic governments that abdicated their responsibility to protect the public. Tech platforms, she says, have become weapons of mass destruction to democracy, and we're seeing it day by day. If you haven't seen her speech, do so as a priority. She commends Australia for taking on the digital giants with a world-first social media ban for children under 16, but says it was a mistake for the government to abandon its proposed law to tackle disinformation on digital platforms last year. We've caught the world's attention on this. Let us not stop there. Ressa says the human rights we deserve in the physical world, we deserve in the virtual world. No one, including her, is saying it's easy. But we all have to be invested in this. We're not just sitting on the fence here reporting on a tennis match. We're in it. Let's not allow ourselves to get intimidated or derailed by those who would seek to distort the concept of freedom of speech for money and power. Yes, these are extraordinary times. And we all know I'm just scratching the surface tonight. And yes, I know how much the deck is stacked against good journalism, even in this country, to an unprecedented degree. Yet here we are again tonight, celebrating the very best of quality journalism, and therein lies our hope and our inspiration. After all my decades in journalism, I have an unshakable belief in an unquenchable public hunger for news that informs, that feeds our curiosity and fires our imaginations, that stimulates crucial debate and can be trusted. That hunger is not just going to evaporate. And if we think we're doing it tough, trying to cut through the shroud of institutional secrecy, or trying to call out those who would polarise our communities for grubby political ends, or resisting attempts by government or corporate machines, cynical or otherwise, to dictate our stories for us, or if you're struggling in a regional or rural community that's been seriously stripped of its news outlets and the most basic resources, remind yourself of those journalists in Gaza or Ukraine or Russia or China or Myanmar or Afghanistan who've been shut down or gone to prison or gone to their graves for an ideal, for seeking to report the truth. We are all one community of journalists, and there's something powerful that we can harness in that we should never lose sight of. And that's really why we are here tonight. Thank you.